Welcome to the Wine and Design Show, where we talk about all things design and discover a new glass of wine every week. My name is Hiranga Gunawadana, and I'm here with Ashani Dialwas.
Hello.
And Roshani De Silva.
Hi.
All three of us are architects, and I run my own architectural and design studio, Atelier Aha, based here in Melbourne. On today's show, we talk about the power of imagination, what led us to becoming architects, and how each of us have been adapting to isolation. With sourdough. And cut! So let's begin with what we're tasting today.
Yeah, so I picked an Australian Shiraz this time because it's freezing cold and there's nothing better than a nice full-bodied. This is supposed to be full-bodied, so...
It says so on the label.
It says so on the label, and generally a Shiraz is full-bodied. So we're having McWilliams Hanwood Estate Shiraz from 2019. And the other nice thing to note about this is it's quite an affordable wine, and this is actually the reason why I picked it, because it was under $10. And as many of you can probably relate, it's quite unstable times at the moment. So it's one of those good wines where it's not going to break the bank.
So those of you guys listening in from the future, we're in the middle of COVID-19 still here in Australia. The year is 2020 and we are alive.
We're trying to survive isolation.
Yes.
So shall we jump into the wine review on this straight away?
Yeah. Well, I want to comment on the color. I noticed that as soon as I poured it, it's a beautiful deep purple color.
Yeah, it's not a red.
Taste it.
It's
It's like
deep,
a burgundy.
deep plum.
And it smells really smooth as well, which I wasn't expecting for something under $10. It smells really smooth and not overly acidic this year.
Is this what they say the nose of the wine is?
The bouquet, right?
I smell spices.
All right, I'm just going to go in straight.
Oh yes, cheers.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And hopefully at home you've got a glass of something delicious as well.
Oh, it does have a...
Okay.
It's got a bit of a peppery. Is it peppery? No.
It's kind of strong on the back of the throat. It is quite tannic.
And it is strong.
We've got
Let's go through the checklist.
A rating scale. Let's go through the checklist. So we've got a spectrum of light and full-bodied. I'd say that this is quite full-bodied, and it says so on the label as well. But on a scale of smooth to tannic, I reckon this is quite tannic. And it is.
I agree.
It's also. Do you reckon it's?
I'm not sure about that.
Dry.
I think it's dry.
Well,
It's definitely. I think
it's quite dry.
it's definitely dry. I'm a bit confused, to be honest. I'm a bit confused about the smooth to tannic and even the light to full bodied. I feel like this is like light.
I might add, we've popped ours in the fridge before, and then we've left it open to decant for about maybe an hour. So it is quite cold, and therefore it's probably not as strong as it would be if it were just, served at room temperature.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree. I think it is, on the tannic for me, I'd say it's about 4 out of 5.
I would give it a 4
to
too.
tannic.
Yeah.
But it is also dry. I'd probably give it a 2. 2 from dry to smooth.
It's definitely more towards dry than sweet.
Yes.
And
dry to sweet.
I reckon.
Yeah, it's dry to sweet,
soft,
and then the next one soft to acidic.
I would rate it pretty high towards acidic on that scale too.
I'd rate it actually a 3 to the soft to acidic.
I think it's right in the middle.
I don't feel like it's very acidic. I feel like it's more dry than it's the dryness that's coming through.
This is more the flavor notes, the spiciness, but it's definitely on the dry side rather than sweet. And the acidity, I feel like the acidity is quite balanced.
Yeah.
The bit that I'm confused about is the full-bodied, because our original definition, so we read, was light to full-bodied, and the comparison was water compared with olive oil. And I feel maybe it's because it's been chilled that it feels lighter than it feeling full-bodied. But what would I know, guys? That's why we've got 3 of us rating this.
And none of us are experts, and yet here we are rating wine. Just as we should be.
Well, I reckon this would taste pretty good with a steak.
I think so.
Steak.
Funnily enough, can I say, on the bottle, there's a picture of a steak for food pairing. There's a picture of a steak. There's a picture of pizza. And there's a picture of a burger.
So these guys
Dirty
made our
burger.
rating much simpler. I like that they included a burger for us more simple people.
I think I would sip on this rather than guzzle it down. It's a slow.
Yeah.
It opens up slowly and
It does seem like the flavor is developing on the tongue quite quickly.
Yeah. My second sip was a lot better than the first. I have to say I didn't really enjoy the first one. It just went straight to the back of my throat, but I'm enjoying it a little bit more now.
What do we think about the artwork
Yeah, what's our review
of the label?
It reminds me of like a country western type thing.
It reminds me of one of those Uncle Sam army recruitment posters from World War One.
Is it because of the
Yes.
colors,
It's the color
blue and the
scheme.
red and the white?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
On
so
the
those of you
off-white background.
So those of you who can't see the label is a cream-colored label with a red
Border?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what font is that?
It's slab serif,
Slab serif. Oh.
like floor slab.
Nice.
Right.
It's got some gold lettering and it's got some navy blue lettering and a watermark of a vineyard.
I agree. It looks a little bit like country western.
I don't know, there's something distinctly American about it. I don't know
Yes.
why.
I think it might.
I think it's the color scheme. The text and the color scheme as well.
Yeah.
It's a red, white, and blue.
And then you have it with
quite...
a nice T-bone.
There's something about the entire package that kind of screams to me wood-fired pizza. I think,
Yes.
and I think that would go down well with this.
Yes, I agree.
Or a burger.
Or a burger.
You may be hungry. So, what have you guys been up to this week?
Well, I have just managed to relax my brain after putting in a whole bunch of stuff into our website. I reckon it's about 70% of the way through for the Wine and Design show. Our wine review database is coming along.
Is it
Fantastic.
okay to check it on mobile mode though? Don't check that yet.
Thanks to my dear wife. A good reminder that no, you should not look at this website on your mobile phone because it is an absolute horrid mess. But we will have updates for you guys very soon. And right now we're only showing sample data, so don't look at it for a while. I've been dabbling in the land of coding and
how's your brain feeling from switching from architect to coder?
I find it really interesting that you're building this website on your own. I think it's fantastic. You're quite multi-talented, I must say. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you do it and what software you use and what your process is?
I'm not sure I can really explain how you do it, but there's the software that I'm using, the website that I'm using is called Webflow. So for any of the coders or graphic artists out there or people looking to build websites, I've previously built my own website on the Wix platform, and it's sort of like a templated platform where you can kind of copy, drag and drop, and pre-fills the coding that you need. So it's called what you see is what you get mode of designing, which is what we're used to in the land of Photoshop and InDesign. So when I picked up that was great, and then I realized its limitations, and this is now going maybe 4 or 5 years back. And then the next version up from that is programming, which is what typically happens if you don't use a WordPress platform. You go straight into CSS coding. I don't even know what that means.
I don't know what that means
But
either.
What does CSS stand for?
See, we're going to pause the recording. I'm just going to look this up because there was a time where I knew what it meant. It stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And for anyone watching this on YouTube, you can find us on YouTube if you're only hearing us via your favorite podcast channel. I'll be throwing up an image of what CSS Cascading Style Sheets looks like. And I'm finding it really interesting because it's a way of programming your website, and it gives instructions to the web browser on how to display the content. So your text appears at font size 12, it's painted blue, the background is set to purple.
But you also use it for the graphic content, isn't it? So you're using numbers and words to create images on the website.
Oh, wow.
So the interesting thing here is with this database that we're doing for the wine rating system, it's a very sophisticated system. We're pumping all this data into Google Sheets. and we are then sending that across to our website and using a whole bunch of, let's say,
witchcraft,
Magic.
using CSS language, pulls in the data and distributes it on the website graphically. And by the end of it, it should look very nice and responsive on your mobile phone, TV screens, and computer displays that you may choose to look at our website on. So definitely give us some feedback when you do check it out, because this will be a work in progress.
Fantastic.
So the other good thing about you being able to do your own coding and programming for the website is that you have control over it yourself, and you don't need to get in a separate person to do that.
Well, yeah, this is one thing that we should touch on for all the creatives out there. It's wonderful to be able to test your skills in other crafts, and the benefits of being practical in your interests. It literally pays, because being a creative means that you may not have as much as you'd like to splurge on hiring someone to code your website. And especially being a creative, hire them again to code your website with your revisions. If you're anything like me, being a perfectionist, I love to know exactly how things are going to show up. I want to know how it works so I can re-engineer it and edit it afterwards, after the mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting as well, because we as creatives, our workspaces and professions are quite fast paced. Like, technology evolves at such a rapid pace that we become quite adaptable, and the rate at which we learn new things is also pretty fast, which means that we're constantly learning new software to help us do our jobs faster. So
Absolutely.
I think this is a classic example of like just being completely adaptive and resourceful. Just doing things for yourself and teaching yourself to acquire new skills so that you can do your job faster. And I think it'll be interesting to hear from other creatives if they feel the same way, if they are. I know that there's a certain group of people who are pretty set in their ways, who are opposed to adaptation, and then there's a certain set like us who are constantly wanting to learn new things. I'd like to hear from you guys out there if how you feel about it, if you're able to keep pace with the constant changes, or if you're more comfortable using software like AutoCAD.
If you're a creative out there, well, first of all, let us know what field you're in. And it'd be awesome to hear from you guys what the evolution has been since you started your career and how you've adapted to change, because now is a serious period of change with coronavirus. We're going to go back to work in a way that is never going to be the same as it was beforehand. And we are definitely in a golden age where relationships can be formed through the reach of our fingertips, literally, the way that technology works. And in the same way, we can be educated straight through the internet, straight through our mobile phones. It's just a Google search away.
It's all about keeping that brain malleable, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't get stuck in a rut.
True.
Sorry.
I also feel quite lucky that we are in the 21st century and in this situation with COVID and being forced to work from home. I think if we were maybe in the mid-80s or 90s, things might have been
We'd just be fired.
A lot more difficult. We'd just be fired, exactly. We wouldn't be able to work from home. Yeah. And of course it depends on your field, your profession. But I think the consequences of COVID would have been a lot worse if we were 30 years ago.
The similar thing happens in every financial downturn, and they happen. I think the average is something between 7 and 10 years. There's a financial downturn. The economy ebbs and it flows, and in those downturns is when everyone starts upskilling. That's the time when you gather all the resource that you need and the personal skills that you need in order to prepare for the climb back to a what's the word? I don't want to use the word a more profitable state, because I hate that word profit.
A more effective and efficient state.
a state that isn't in a financial downturn.
Well, this is it seems like it's cyclical because it is a process that's been repeating throughout history. In the time of the bubonic plague in the early 1400s, and the end of the Black Plague is what led to the Renaissance period, which is like one of the richest periods of art and music and creativity. And I've actually been experiencing a bit of a renaissance myself because I've been using this time just to gather all of the knowledge that I can possibly get. And that's like, I've just been taking all of these courses.
Yeah, Roshani, you mentioned you've been looking at a couple of courses last time, episode 1.
Yes, there's so many courses out there. I wish I had more time. I haven't been bored at all. I've just been trying to gather as much information and knowledge as possible in this time. So it's been great. Yeah. And the best part of it is people have been quite generous, and there's a lot that's available for free. And in these times where money is tight, their generosity is quite appreciated.
Yeah, I have to say, Ashini and I have been learning so much just straight from YouTube. Like, there's a vast amount of amazing people putting out content there. And we hope we might be useful in the similar right, just like them. Ashini, I know you can talk what you've learned.
Yeah. I do my troubleshooting through YouTube because I'm a visual person.
Talking about acquiring new skills, I know a lot of people have been baking bread and trying out new recipes. Judging from people's social media accounts.
Everyone in survival mode.
Yes.
Yeah.
When in survival, bake bread. It'll get you through.
Going back to the basics. Just going back to the basics.
Yeah.
But I know, Ashini, you've been doing this for quite some time, and I've been a little curious as to how exactly this is done, and if I can attempt it and succeed.
The sourdough baking?
Yeah, do you want to tell us about how you bake and your sourdough and your starter?
If you're a husband or a girlfriend or boyfriend,
who's to say that the husbands aren't making the sourdough?
Okay, let's reframe this. If you're a partner and your partner is about to embark on this journey, take my advice and step aside. It takes a while to create this.
Yes, and you're essentially having a new baby in the house, which is your sourdough starter. So a sourdough is one of the oldest forms of bread making in that it uses natural yeast as a leavening agent. So it doesn't use commercial baker's yeast that you would typically find in your supermarket breads. So with the sourdough bread, there's only 3 ingredients, and that's flour, water, and salt. So it's super simple, and it's better for you because it's all natural, and including those bacteria. It grosses Harunga out.
It doesn't seem simple to me. It's like a wild science experiment unfolding. I'm just there.
It is. There's a lot of measuring, but once you know, like once you get the hang of it, it just becomes second nature, and you find a way to fit it into your schedule. And
the schedule bit is the one really interesting thing, because when you first started it, you were following other people's recipes, and their schedule is probably quite different to the one that you are following right now.
So because I'm a home baker, I don't bake a loaf of bread every day like a commercial baker would. I bake once a week. And the thing with sourdough starter is you have to keep it alive by feeding it every day.
So how do you make this? Sorry, I want to know how you create this sourdough starter. What is the process?
Okay. So you mix equal parts of flour and water in a very small quantity. The next day you discard half of it and feed it, equal part flour and water. The next day you discard half of it and feed it equal parts flour and water. And now the discard, you can use it in other recipes, but at the start you need to do this process. Yeah, for example, pancakes, waffles, those type of things.
As opposed to throwing it out in the bin.
Exactly.
Right.
And you do this for about 2 weeks until the starter is good enough to bake a loaf.
So do you have to look for certain signs in the starter, or is it just every day you do it?
The starter
on schedule.
Yes, you do look for signs. The starter will rise in volume, so sometimes it doubles or triples in volume, And it also starts to smell a little bit alcoholic and a little bit sweet at the same time. It smells a little bit like beer.
I thought someone was making
okay.
beer in my oven the other day.
Yeah, so I keep it in the oven because it prefers a stable, warm environment.
So you store it in the oven?
I just store it in the oven closed, but that's only when I'm getting the starter active. And I get the starter active when I'm baking. And once I'm done baking, I save a little bit, keep that in the fridge for the next time that I bake. And this is something that I learned from YouTube, because I was following recipes where people would feed the starter every single day, and every day you have to discard a part of that starter. And that's such a waste.
Yeah.
So now you've got a recipe.
So now I've got a recipe where I only keep about 20 grams of starter. And now, by the way, it's now stable, so I can do this, whereas
So
at the start I couldn't. 20 grams is it's essentially called the scrapings. It's the scrapings method.
So it's literally like a Nutella jar with just whatever remains that can't be scraped out. Literally that amount of starter remains in the jar.
Yes.
And that's what's used for the next batch.
Yes. So there was this YouTuber called Baking with Jack, who is very sensible actually, because his techniques were really good for home bakers like me. And I didn't want to be baking pancakes every day with discarded starter. So I keep 20 grams in the fridge. When I'm ready to bake, it's generally on a Saturday. So I would take the starter out on Friday, feed it to the quantity that I needed for the recipe, plus a little bit extra to save for next time. And then I would use that starter in the recipe. And then the process from feeding that starter to baking is about 24 hours. So it's a really slow fermentation process.
Super patient.
It's super patient, but that's the difference between sourdough and the bread that you find in the supermarket that has yeast in it and it's been sped up. And so sourdough is easier to digest because of it. And you don't really need to do much during those 24 hours, but it just needs that time to ferment and become active, and that helps it rise, and it gives it that nice texture and flavor.
Oh, wow.
So there's a little bit of love.
And what type of flour do you use?
So we use part rye flour, 50% rye and 50% white bread flour.
Okay.
And I've found that generally tends to work for.
But that's the stuff that you can play around with to match your taste and design your own bread.
It's a bit of experimentation. So sometimes last time I used part rye, part spelt flour. It's a bit of play.
That's really cool. I might try this out, but I might need to borrow some of your starter.
Yeah, of course.
Starting
It'll save you 2 weeks.
The starter.
My starter's name is Yolanda, by the way. It's very important that you name your starter because otherwise they die a terrible death.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure that's true, but it certainly takes a lot of time and experimentation to bring them to life. That's for sure.
So the recipe that I've sort of developed was based on my schedule, and that was minimal effort, let's say. So lazy girls sourdough.
I reckon it must make your house smell wonderful. That smell of baking bread is just beautiful.
It is beautiful. And then when the starter is ready to be fed, it smells like alcohol. So it's a bit of both.
That's really
cool.
So
Roshani, how's your sketching course going?
Oh, I started a sketching course this week on Skillshare. So Skillshare is one of those really cool websites for creatives. It's got heaps of courses like animation, creative writing, illustration, graphic design. So this is a little anecdote. I used to draw a lot as a kid, just endlessly, but I stopped drawing when I started architecture school. I reckon I got a little intimidated.
Isn't that amazing?
I find that extremely ironic.
Yeah. Because people think that all we do is draw all day.
Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting. Like, I'd like to talk about this a little bit because the origins of where we got to, and I suppose what were the first signs of us ending up as architects? Because I used to draw heaps, just like you, Roshani.
Yeah.
And, well, to be honest, when I entered architecture school, I didn't know what architecture was by definition. My father's a structural draftsman, so I had a whole bunch of experience stemming from that. But when I graduated from high school, and this is during high school, I got that experience. Before I entered architecture, I was applying for industrial design, computer game animation courses, and that's what I was lining up to do. And then my father mentioned architecture, and so I signed up for that. And that's how I ended up becoming an architect.
Yeah. Well, my story is slightly different. My story starts with Lego.
Yep. How many architects out there, their story started with Lego?
I know. I would love to know. I would love to know how many architects Lego claims responsibility.
You know what would be an interesting statistic?
Yeah.
How many architects were influenced by Lego, and how many engineers were influenced by Meccano? Because I think there were two different streams there, and Meccano was just that little bit too tedious.
Was Meccano a bit more mechanical?
No, Meccano was the metal pieces, and you got the nuts and bolts.
With the nuts and bolts. I had a Meccano set as well. But, well, growing up in Sri Lanka in the 90s during a civil war, Lego wasn't really freely available. But I saw this in a magazine, and my parents, my wonderful parents, they had friends who were traveling to Singapore, and they got me a Lego set from Singapore. And I only had one set. But my entire life, and then my brother, who was born 9 years later, he has so many. He has well over 10 to 15 Lego sets, but I had one. And it changed my life. And I used to spend, and I was an only child for 9 years as well. So I spent hours and hours and hours building and rebuilding things. It was never what was in the box. It was never what the instructions. Yeah. It was completely different. And my mom one
Adversity brings out the best in us.
I know. I think, it is really interesting because when you've got no one to play with, you become creative.
Yeah.
And I'm quite thankful. I think it was quite a blessing in a way. That
I used to draw
with.
stories. I used to draw stories to entertain myself because that's what we had. We think of these things when we think of the kids these days with iPads.
Yeah, it's very different.
We didn't have We didn't have an endless stream of apps. We just had a piece of paper and a pen, and that's how
we just had to entertain ourselves.
Yeah, go outside and a rock becomes a dinosaur egg, and you know, like it's you be creative as a child when you make things up. Make believe is what makes you creative.
Definitely. My cousin used to come over now and then, and when she comes over, I used to be like, because I was the older one, I used to be like, do you want to play imagination today, or do you want to play with Barbies? And most of the time it was imagination. And we used to invent all of these games. I had a wonderful childhood, and I'm so thankful that I had that kind of childhood with technology.
I've been thinking about this, the imagination. That means, I reckon that's going to mean different things in the future. And when we've got the influence, technically speaking, we are already augmented with technology just by having a mobile phone. The influence of us going to one restaurant over the other is just straight away dictated by your Google Maps or whatever app you select. There's a certain bias that is already built in to the question that you ask. You are given that
information. Exactly. You're given that information.
It's not a raw question. It's not like a blank slate.
Yeah.
And that's part of boredom. Like, I was creative when I was small, but I still got bored. But that boredom led to something else. The boredom led to creativity. Which is us breaking rules in different formats. Now, I have to wonder about... I've been thinking about this, actively thinking about this here and there, and it keeps cropping up. How imaginative are the people, the children that come after us going to be? Are they going to know too much that they're kind of stumped by the information overload? Because that happens as well. You end up frozen when you have too much information right in front of you.
You don't know what to do with it?
You don't know what to do with it, or the answers are too kind of forwards of any questions that you could potentially ask. So then you stop asking questions, you just start doing.
Yeah, and you start Googling as well.
Yeah, you start Googling.
And it's just, and then...
And that's where imagination dies.
Yeah, I feel like imagination has died a little bit because I've been observing friends of my kids of my friends and my little cousins, and the way they play is completely different to the way we used to play. They're always with their iPads and sitting in a corner playing a computer game. But our parents would probably say the same thing.
Our parents would probably say the same thing, where they climbed mango trees and fell out of them, broke their arms. We didn't necessarily do that.
Well, I climbed trees. I didn't break my arm. But now it's safe, right?
But now it's that extra layer, isn't it? It's the next.
I think we had toys and dolls that we played with, but that requires a certain amount of imagination as well.
Yeah.
But when it comes to games and video games and iPads and stuff, like the game's already set up for you. Sure, you have to use. It requires a little bit of skill. But it doesn't require imagination, and I think imagination is key in creative fields.
I agree.
If you don't have
100%.
that, yeah. And then I think that's also a little sad. Like I feel a little sad when I think of my story, where I stopped drawing when I started architecture, and it's because I got really intimidated because I felt like my drawings weren't beautiful enough and I wasn't skilled enough.
Yeah,
and everybody
I know
else
so
around
many
me,
stories like that.
Yeah, and everyone else around me could draw better than me, and then I just stopped drawing. So there were two things that led me to become an architect: drawing and Lego. And I just stopped when I actually became an architect. And then it was only recently that someone told me, your drawings are your drawings, you should never make excuses for them.
Absolutely.
And there was a bit of really good advice I received from this person, and since then one of my colleagues has been encouraging me to draw more. And I mean, my drawings aren't as pretty as his ones, but they're still my drawings and they're not bad, and with practice you just keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely the key. And he was telling me I practiced a lot too. And also, if you look at the drawings of famous architects like Le Corbusier and then
so many of them
Frank
start
Gehry,
so
for
scrappy.
example.
Yeah.
Look, if you look at Zaha Hadid, she started painting, and her sketches
she was
are
a
just
painter
works of art.
first.
She was a painter.
She was a painter first, not an architect. She later became an architect.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at people like Frank Gehry, his sketches are just scribbles. But he's just an architect, so he's not conscious of his.
Oh, how I despised architects! But we still admire their buildings. I've been dreaming of doing a sketch of a Gehry building in the most artistic way possible.
Yeah, I reckon it would be really good watercolor.
I was thinking of doing something like a very minimalist line drawing and saying, this is all he thought about when he created this thing.
Have you seen that Simpsons episode where there's like a crushed bit of paper on the floor and that then forms the inspiration for the building?
Yeah, actually, your story to becoming an architect was really different to us.
Yeah, so I've actually wanted to be an architect since I was about 10 years old, and that was mainly from, I guess, my grandfather, who also wanted to be an architect, and he introduced me to the concept of what architecture was. And
unlike myself, who didn't know what it was until I entered the first briefing in architecture school.
Yeah,
I was pretty similar to Ashini. Like, I knew what I wanted to be since I was like 9, and I worked towards it.
Exactly. Yeah, so as a kid, every time I went on holidays to Sri Lanka, I was always really inspired by Geoffrey Bawa buildings. And I think many people have been. I don't know if you felt the same, Roshani, growing up in Sri Lanka.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But
he was probably the first architect that I learned about, that I heard of.
Same.
He was like Geoffrey Bawa is God in Sri Lanka.
The
god of architecture.
I got lectured by my own university lecturer about Geoffrey Bawa, and I was like, dude, I visited this building quite a few times.
Yeah, so it's just one of those. I spoke about the sensory experience of good architecture, and I think that hit me when I was a child. And you get to experience what a beautiful space feels like, and you are fully immersed in
the space
good design. Space.
Well, there's a particular feel to Geoffrey Bawa buildings that is inherent in his particular style of architecture. Well, particularly at that period of time. It's quite distinct compared to what was happening in the rest of the world.
Yes, it is. It's very tropical modern. I'd call it tropical modern. And I think Geoffrey Bawa was a genius, and he was he changed the field of architecture in Sri Lanka. But what's important to note is that he was one of a kind. There are heaps of architects in Sri Lanka who try to emulate him. But he's the original one, and I think you should appreciate him as an individual and try to develop your own style rather than trying to emulate him.
Yeah,
because only Geoffrey Bawa can be Geoffrey Bawa.
Exactly, but my take home from Geoffrey Bawa is that site is everything, and every building should be specific to the site, and that is why in the end hire an architect, because that's what we do. We don't plonk the same building on a different site. We think about what it is that makes that site beautiful, what are the views, what are the natural features of that site, and we find a way to incorporate that into the building.
I think we should do an episode on local architects and our inspiration.
Yes.
Yeah, we should do that, definitely.
Yeah, next time.
Well, it's amazing how different artists and different creative fields find their inspiration and forms and playing with paper, creating models and things. First part is about creating a stimulus for what you're about to create. And then it is about finding the core idea and then expanding from it to meet your end criteria, whether it's on a canvas or whether it's through a building or whether it's like even designing a remote control. I always think of industrial designers because they're kind of closest to our fingertips. When we hold a mouse, it has been designed for our hand and nothing else.
Yeah, it's ergonomic, yes, and everything. Yeah.
There are some building architecture a little bit that one step further out, and that's what I've experienced. Say, for example, some shopping centers. You walk into them and it's carnage. It's a terrible experience sometimes, where the architecture is designed to trap you within the building for a long period of time and spend money. I think it's probably more strategic than it is like good design.
I think the principles of good design apply at every scale, whether it's industrial design, whether you're looking at a pen or whether you're looking at a space. Things like scale, ergonomics, light, color, the principles are the same, I reckon, in every type of design. What do you think?
I think the deployment changes.
I think
the execution changes.
Yeah, but the difference with architecture versus industrial design or maybe not graphic design, but with architecture it's about the sensory experience as well, and the memory that's evoked from being in a space, and how does it make you feel? Do you relax, or do you feel productive, or feel reflective? I think that's the difference between architecture and it's not just about being practical and the lighting and the functionality of it. It's also about the feeling and the mood.
I think it's extending now the psychology of space.
Exactly what.
And the psychology of experiences does stretch now into other fields such as web design and graphic design.
Yeah.
I've done a whole bunch of research. So from my experience in starting up my own practice, I've investigated what you would think are non-primary fields of knowledge, such as, maybe they are primary now these days, but marketing, psychology, graphic design, colors, and they're completely tied. Maybe not 10 years ago, but these days, they're completely tied to principles around emotions and how a person experiences that page that you scroll down on your mobile phone, the way that you flick sideways on a particular app, or you scroll downwards on a particular app. And actually, we were talking about this the other day. With regards to the Wine and Design Show
on Instagram. Follow us if you haven't already.
If you're on Instagram, follow us. If you're on Facebook, follow us. If you're on YouTube, subscribe and follow us. And leave us comments in the comment sections of each of these platforms. We were discussing how each of them perform in a certain way, and Instagram stories is a good one, where you either continuously scroll down, so you're actively giving some input into the device and it results in you seeing different images in your feed, or you just sit on autoplay in your Instagram stories and it scrolls by automatically.
So are you saying that stories is just the
lazy version?
The lazy version. It caters to two different audiences.
I sort of feel like it's the lazy version, or I wonder if it's a tactical step by Instagram so that if you set your phone down and you haven't closed the app, it just starts scrolling by itself. I just wonder.
Oh yeah, that hadn't occurred to me. I only started using Instagram stories recently, much to my brother's amusement.
Sorry for the listeners out there. This is probably really nerdy, but I tend to think deep on these sorts of weird observations.
Yeah.
So Roshani, you mentioned last week that you've been looking at languages. Was it Coursera or?
No. Well, I've been trying to study Spanish for the past 3 years. And I've just stopped and started a couple of times because I've gotten too busy.
I started through a mobile app when I started architecture because I felt like I wasn't learning enough.
But you did it to like impress a girl, right?
Sorry?
I think there was that.
He did it to impress a girl. He
and I wanted to learn
Spanish
Spanish
to impress a girl. Not me, mind you.
Right.
And we're going to cut
So
that
I
bit
reckon
out.
you gave it up when you met Ashini.
So how's it going? Is it
It's going all right. Well, it has been. We've got some Spanish colleagues at work who promised to help me, but didn't really end up helping me, so I had to help myself.
Oh yeah, I think I knew the ones. They said they would help me too because with the little bits of
we
Spanish
all know
I
the one. We all know the one. Well, I've been using this app called Memrise.
Is that a new one?
No, it's been around for a while. It's available on the Apple App Store and on Google Play. And it offers like 16 different languages. It offers easy and widely spoken languages like French and Spanish. And it also offers more complex languages like Korean and Indonesian and, of course, Mandarin and Cantonese as well. And what's interesting about this is that it was set up by a Grandmaster of memory and a neuroscientist. And
so they talk about embedding it in your long-term memory.
Exactly. So that's what's really interesting. So they use a technique known as spaced repetition.
Yes.
To speed up your ability to remember new words and phrases. And what they do is they increase. So they initially introduce a new phrase to you, and in the first couple of days, you have to there are different techniques. You've got to select the correct phrase from a group of 4. You have to type it out. Somebody sounds it out, and you have to select what sounds closest to that. And then what happens is in the first few days, it's quite regular, and then they increase the intervals where they expose you to that particular phrase. So your memory gets refreshed
more frequently
longer
in the long
and
term.
longer. Yes, and over the long term.
Yeah,
and
right.
That's so basically your memory is refreshed, and it helps embed the phrase into your memory and commit it.
Does it sound like, from what you're describing, it sounds like they're also catering to the different forms in which people learn, like whether it's visual feedback or selection input,
Yes.
or repeating it back? Is there like a recording type thing, or it's just
Memrise
input?
doesn't have a recording. It's got different. Yeah, so you're right. It caters to lots of different types of learning techniques, visual and auditory.
Yeah.
But the problem I find with Memrise is that for example, with Spanish, Spanish has lots of different types of verbs. So, for example, and their verbs rely on the pronouns. So, for example, to speak in Spanish is hablar, and that verb depends on who is saying it. So, it depends. If it's I speak, it's hablo. If it's you speak, it's hablas. And
you have to conjugate the verb depending on the pronoun.
yes, exactly. And it doesn't, for us, I think for visual people, it's easy to see.
I'm completely lost. This
You
is
studied
terrible.
language in school, right? It's the same in French. It's exactly the same. And it just, all it does is you just need to speak with someone. Like I used to have a tutor in year 11 and 12, and all we did, we just spoke together. We just had a conversation for the entire hour once a week, and that it was just that time where you have to you recall what you've learned, and then you have to practice speaking it, and that practicing speaking it is what helps you to become fluent in it. And unfortunately, I'm no longer fluent in French, but because of that reason exactly, that I haven't been practicing it. I haven't spoken with anyone.
Yeah.
One thing that I found,
practice is key.
Yes.
One thing that I found in my search for answers to all my questions, which happen to all be accessible via Google, which means I end up looking a lot more than I should be relative to executing on things that I would love to be executing on. I'm more seeking answers. There's this theory that if you, and it applies to those people signing up for all these Skillshare courses and Coursera's and all of that, because I know so many of them, so many of my friends. It's awesome to learn all these things, but when you don't deploy them almost immediately, they don't get loaded into your short-term or even your long-term
memory
to store it in there. And what I found myself doing is categorizing things or even questions. I write down my questions and I keep them in a diary, which I type out so that I can search it really easily. And when the question comes back up again and there's a priority to answer it, I dig up the original question, and then I've got 2 questions that I find valuable in order to answer it. And then immediately, once I've got the answer, deploy or practice the learning, and then suddenly it's kind of more embedded or ingrained.
So what happens there is, like, every time you access that memory, your neurological pathway just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. That's the science behind repetition.
Exactly.
Just strengthening your neurological pathway. So that's why practice basically makes progress. And even when every time you learn something new.
That's important for us creatives.
You develop muscle memory as well. If you say, for example, when I'm learning my guitar, I have actually noticed a huge difference by practice. Like every time I practice, I get better and better and better.
Yeah, the human body is a very interesting computer and mechanism in that way, isn't it?
Well, it's been described as, this is especially useful for the creatives out there thinking about where they want to go with their careers and how they're going to get there. And the human body is the most adaptable machine there is. And that goes down to physically, that goes down to muscle memory, that goes down to how you apply your skill sets. If you want to learn something, especially in this day and age where we can access whatever we want and find the information that we need, we can learn anything so quickly that if we practice it, then we have suddenly changed the way we've adapted to the world for whatever purpose it is. I came across this along with my studies in kind of entrepreneurship, is that if we really want something, the human being can be adapted to it. And similarly, we have tried to adapt the world to what we need. And that's starting to now kind of kick back, where we're having the failure of our ecosystems and this crisis that is mounting, even with coronavirus. But we've adapted. We are adapted as not just a singular human being, but as a society, as a group of individuals, we're able to adapt to almost anything. And if there's something that you want to learn and that you want to deploy your hand at, it's all a matter of just putting your time and effort into just doing it.
I agree. And hence why we're doing this podcast. It's completely new.
Completely foreign to us.
Completely foreign.
We've been on the radio before, but we've never been on a podcast.
I haven't been on the radio, but on that note, we'd love to hear from you what you guys have been up to in this time and how you have been adapting. Have you been learning something new? Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So leave us a comment on Instagram, on YouTube.
We are looking out for you guys on YouTube and Instagram. And if you feel like dropping us a voicemail, chime in on our anchor.fm/The Wine and Design Show. And I'm pretty sure you can leave us a voicemail and we will be sure to play you on our next episode.
Yeah, and if there's something that you'd like us to talk about in the next episode, leave us a comment as well.
So we look forward to hearing from you guys. So until next time, keep those thoughts churning and those glasses swirling.